Hey guys, what is up? It is Bibs7 here again, and welcome to my day one guide for the first boss of the Elder God Wars dungeon, Kerapac the Bound. In this video, I'm mostly just going to go over the fight itself and won't go into too much detail on specific gear setups. This will include the basic strategies I figured out over my first few kills I've done here at the boss, and hopefully it will help out anyone who is struggling to get started or get their first solos in on the hard mode. Now, there are no actual requirements to start the boss fight, but I highly recommend you complete the City at Sentiston quest and fully upgrade your Pontifex Shadow Ring prior to doing the boss. You can finalize that upgrade by adding 1,000 of the Resonant Anima of Jas, which can be bought for very cheap off the Grand Exchange, and this will make your life a whole lot easier by negating a stun from one of his specs. If you are an Iron Man, however, you obviously don't have access to the Grand Exchange. You will have to kill the boss quite a few times to get the Resonant Anima of Jas, at which point you can upgrade your ring and make your life a whole lot easier. Until the next boss comes out, you can just easily access this boss even with 0 KC using the PVM Hub Fateful Portal. Otherwise, you'll have to make your way to the City of Sentiston through the dig site until you get your first kill to attune your PVM Hub Portal to the location. When you first start out at the boss, I highly recommend starting with a Beast of Burden until you get more comfortable with the final phase. You can then switch to a Ripper Demon or whatever DPS familiar you would like once you feel you are ready to make that leap. I've personally been using Mage since it's the style I have by far the best gear for, but range is equally viable and most likely better considering it has a much higher DPS ceiling than Mage does at the moment. I wouldn't really recommend melee, but you can use it if you like. It'll just make some specs a little bit more annoying to deal with, and it would also make it harder to soul split fick if you opt to do that, because when you're in melee distance with Kerapac, the soul split or like the hit spot timing is a little bit strange. But yeah, it's up to you. You can try melee if you'd like. Kerapac is actually pretty easy to hit on, thankfully, so you can probably even get away with the recommended tier 80 weapons if you'd like, but as always, I would of course recommend the best gear you can afford for the chosen style you'll be going with. As far as an aura, you can always use like Maniacal or Reckless for the damage, but you really don't need their accuracy bonuses, so do feel free to go for the Majorat aura or Dark Magic if you have those available and don't want to waste resets on Maniacal or Reckless, or maybe you want to save those for other bosses. You really don't need to use them here. Other than that, just make sure you have a shield, as you definitely want to take advantage of defensives like Resonance and possibly Barricade, Reflect, and even Immortality on the final phase of the fight. Also highly recommended for you to have Enhanced Devoted or Devoted of some sort on your armor, as that is extraordinarily beneficial here on the last phase. Also really good to bring Cinderbanes if you can afford those, and Weapon Poison, as this boss is susceptible to poison. And that's pretty much it for the gear recommendations and random setups and stuff, so let's go ahead and jump right into the fight. Just to be clear, this guide will be focusing on the hard mode version of the fight, as that is the only way to get the tier 95 staff pieces. The general ideas here can probably apply to the normal mode, as it is just easier in pretty much every way, but some things will be a bit different, so just be aware of that. And also important to note is that the group size does not change the HP of the boss, and you can go in with up to 3 people in total. Going with 3 people is quite a bit easier and definitely recommended if you don't feel like learning how to solo or think it might be too difficult for you. It's definitely a lot easier to do in a 3-man team. Regardless of how many people you bring, though, you'll always get 3 drops. So if you're by yourself, you'll get all 3, and if you are with others, they will each get 1, and you'll get 1 as well. And no matter how many people are in as well, Kerapac will always start with the same amount of HP, which is 450,000, and the fight will be split up into 4 different phases. The boss will phase, and you'll move on to the next after you deal 400,000 HP of damage, which leaves him with 50,000, of course, after which he will recover to full health and begin the next phase. And then when going from phase 3 to 4, he will only recover to 200,000. So he'll recover to full health on the transition from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, and then from 3 to 4, he will recover to 200k. Phases 1 to 3 are essentially identical to each other, with no new special attacks that he learns to worry about at all. There's just a slight variation that makes it a little bit more difficult that you need to be aware of, but really they can all be approached in pretty much the exact same way. And then you have phase 4, which is totally different and much, much more difficult than the others, and I'm sure is the spot where most people struggle, so I'll try to focus on that a lot towards the end of the guide. Another thing that's important to know about, from phase 2 onward, an extra action button, similar to the one that you use at Rakshan Solak, will appear for you to use. And when you press this, it will take a snapshot of your current character state, which includes your health, adrenaline, prayer, where you're standing, and your ability cooldowns. It'll then count down for 10 seconds, which you can see on your buff bar, and at the end of the countdown, you'll be snapped back to the state you were in when you press the button, which means your health will either go up or down. Same with your adrenaline, everything will be back in that state, including cooldowns on your abilities. So if you use an ability during the time warp, it will be back off cooldown immediately when the time warp ends, which can be very useful. And this can be used for both offense and defense, so it provides a great avenue for optimization within the fight, and I certainly won't be using this ability optimally in any of the clips or tips that you see. It's just the way that I approach the fight right now, given the limited knowledge we have, and you can feel free to improve it or improvise your own usage of the time warp ability. So you definitely want to make sure you are using it though, because it is very, very powerful. The final phase is pretty unique as it spawns 3 echoes of Kerapac, which have 100,000 HP each. And for each of these, an echo of the player will also be spawned that has 10,000 HP and will fight the echo of Kerapac, dealing low amounts of damage. The real version of Kerapac will also still be around and will go near the gate that is the entrance to the arena and be immune to damage until you kill all 3 of his echoes. However, he will still fire magic auto attacks occasionally. And during this time, Kerapac will gain an extremely punishing enrage mechanic, and this will be increased if any of your echoes die and if you kill any of Kerapac's echoes. And of course, you do have to kill his echoes to get the fight completed, so it is important to be aware that each time you kill one, his enrage will be increased. You must try to keep your echoes alive by possessing them and replenishing their health if possible, while also killing the echoes of Kerapac, after which you can move on to finishing Kerapac himself to end the fight. And yeah, that pretty much wraps up the fight overview. So now I'm going to go over all 3 special attacks Kerapac has on phases 1 to 3, talk about what they do and how you can avoid them. For phases 1 to 3, Kerapac only has 3 different special attacks that he can do. The attack rotation is always the same for each of these 3 phases and will reset to the beginning of the rotation when you start a new phase. I'll show it here on screen, but the rotation is 3 autos, the tear pool thing, 3 more autos, the slams 3 times, 3 more autos, and the lightning summon. There'll then be 10 autos after the lightning before he does the pool thing again, which will start the cycle over. So for the first special attack you'll encounter, the tear into you pool thing, Kerapac will say, "I will tear right through you," shortly after which he will send a pool type magic attack through your character. That will deal low-ish magic damage and will also stun you. And then it will travel through you and end up on the edge of the arena behind you. So basically, if you draw a line from Kerapac through you to the edge of the arena, that's where the pool will show up. And Kerapac will then siphon from this pool with like this green siphon animation. And if you are standing between him and it, and also like not really between him and it, but kind of close, but the green stuff doesn't go through you, the animation is a little off to the hitbox. So you need to make sure you're standing a little further out than you might expect. But if you are standing in it, you will take rapid hits of around 500 to 1,000 magic damage through your prayer, and that can hurt really bad. So you definitely don't want to be standing in between him and the pool when he is siphoning from it. And even after he's done siphoning, the pool will remain where it lands, and you will take low typeless damage hits around 300 to 500 every few seconds until it is killed, and it does have 15,000 health. To deal with this, I just use Anticipate before the pool is sent out and step to the side to avoid the siphon, and then kill the pool with a threshold or so. But it is worth noting that you are able to avoid this coming out at all if you step under Kerapac while he's trying to fire the special. So you can try that to remove the need of killing it, as that can be pretty beneficial, as 15,000 HP is not a whole lot, but definitely can mess up your I guess, your rhythm of the fight and make it so you have to waste a threshold on that. So definitely try to do that if you are able to step under him to avoid him firing it out. The second special attack is the Slam special, and Kerapac will say something like, "I will put you in your place," and then fly up into the air. After a few seconds of being there, he will slam down on wherever you are standing, dealing an AoE melee hit. And if you don't have the upgraded Pontifex Shadow Ring, you will be stunned, which is why you really, really want to have that thing upgraded. If you do have Anticipate or Freedom active in order to avoid the stun, it will work, but their effect will be immediately ended, so you can't use it for multiple of the attacks. And if you don't move from the spot that Kerapac has slammed down on, regardless of whether you got stunned or not, you will take rapid melee damage indefinitely. He'll just stand there and you'll be taking, or sit there with his staff sort of in the ground, and you will just be taking rapid melee damage until you move. So you do want to get out of the way as soon as possible. And it is possible to avoid the stun and melee hit entirely if you do surge at the right time. But if you have the stun immunity, it's not really necessary. You can just walk out as he is slamming down. If you do use surge to avoid it, though, it actually has its cooldown reset, so you can tell that Jagex was aware that that might be a good way to avoid it and let you reset the cooldown on it, as you can use it again for the next slam that is coming. It's also worth noting that you can't use devotion prior to the slam, as he will say that your godly devotion will not save you or something like that and disable the effect, but I believe you can use it after the slam has happened, and if he's still doing the melee hits, if you want to sit there and get the ones hit on you for a while to do a little bit of extra damage, that's something I believe is possible. It is pretty easy to avoid once you have the ring, but if you don't have it, try to use Anticipate for one of them, Freedom for the second one, and then try to surge the final one. But it is important to know that he will not continue dealing rapid melee hits on the third slam, so you don't even have to move away from that one. You just have to move on the first and the second. The final special attack on phases 1 through 3 is the Lightning Walls, and Kerapac will say something like, "Witness the power of the staff," and summon a wall of lightning that will slowly move across the arena, and this will deal rapid hits of very large typeless damage, around 3 to 4k per hit, so you definitely want to avoid it as best as possible. You just can go ahead and use Bladed Dive or Surge to get through the wall as it approaches, and it should be fairly easy to avoid doing that. And yeah, those are all the specials Kerapac has access to on phases 1 to 3. On phase 2, an Echo of Kerapac will start appearing for each special attack that will repeat the same special in the same place he did it on the previous phase, but as long as you stand in a bit of a different spot for each phase, these can essentially be ignored, and they are the only change between the phases. It's important to note that the Echo will not spawn an additional pool for the Tear Through You special attack, so you just need to watch out for the siphon that one does, and you can kill the pool of the real Kerapac. That is the only one that spawns a pool, unless of course you are able to skip it by walking under, as you hopefully can. And yeah, the lightning wall will have 2 walls on phase 2, so it can be a bit more dangerous and hard to avoid. And then on phase 3, of course, 2 echoes will spawn, which is similarly pretty easy to avoid in general. But the 3 lightning walls can be a pretty big pain, so be careful with your movement abilities, and if worse comes to worst, you can try and sprint through one without getting hit too much. But yeah, that is pretty much it for those 3 phases. Just DPS them down as quickly as you can in between the special attacks, and I would tend to use the Time Warp either right before dumping thresholds and EOF specs, or I would activate it while I had 100% adrenaline, use like a Wild Magic or some other threshold, and then build back up and Sunshine right as it ended, which would then immediately give me 100% adrenaline, and I could use all my thresholds right away and, DPS as best as I could that way, which maybe it's not necessarily the best, but if you find some better ways to use that Time Warp, go ahead and do it. I just highly recommend you make some use of it, as it is quite powerful for increasing your damage. An important note is to not eat during the Time Warp, because you'll be reset to whatever HP you had when you clicked on the button. Of course, if you're about to die, then definitely eat, but even if your health is a lower amount when you click the button, it'll still lower your health down after you get reset, so be aware of that. But other than that, once you've depleted Kerapac to 50k health 3 times, phase 4 will begin, which is much, much more difficult. Due to the complexity of this phase and the many different approaches you can take, I'll mostly go over general strategies and what worked for me personally, but there is a massive amount of room for improvising and refining here. So definitely just know that what I say is not necessarily the very best, but hopefully the advice and tips I give will help you survive the painful amount of damage that can happen during this phase. As Phase 4 starts, Kerapac will fly over near the entrance gate to the arena, and his 3 echoes will spawn around the arena, and each of them will be fighting an echo of your player character. So for clarity, I'm going to call the player characters things echoes, and I'm going to call the Kerapac things clones to try and make it a little clear. It's a bit confusing here talking about it, but anyway. Each of your echoes starts with 10,000 HP and will take around 700 to 1300 damage per hit from one of the Kerapac clones. You're able to enter the time thread of each echo by clicking on it, which will put you in that location and replace your health with the health of the echo. And based on the deaths of the echoes and of the Kerapac clones and Kerapac himself will gain an enrage, and this enrage will give 1% increased damage to them per stack and also reduce the effectiveness of your protection prayers by 0.25% per stack. So needless to say, this can start to get very painful very fast if the enrage gets high. One of your echoes dying will add 25 enrage, and one of Kerapac's clones dying will add 50 enrage, and he will also gain an extra 25 enrage once all of his clones are killed. If one of your echoes is killed, the Kerapac clone that no longer has something to attack will simply begin attacking you as well, and during the entire phase, Kerapac himself will be hitting you with magic auto attacks. There are a few ways to approach this phase. One is to go all out on DPS and try to kill the Kerapac clones as fast as possible, mostly ignoring your own echo's health and keeping them alive. If you have like a maxed range setup and are like really very good at DPS, this is probably a decent option, but it will be pretty painful. On the other hand, you can also go all out on defense, trying to keep your echoes alive as best you can using time warps and defensives while slowly chipping down the Kerapac clones. This can be pretty beneficial as it will cause all of the Kerapac clones to die around the same time, meaning the enrage that they give will only affect the final 1v1 against the real Kerapac. But in my opinion, the best approach is a bit of a middle ground. In my experience though, regardless of how you want to approach it, it's probably best to let one of your echoes die, as maintaining all 3 of them is very, very difficult and pretty much just requires you to eat a ton of food. But yeah, that's up to you if you think it is worth it to try and keep them all alive. The key to the phase, though, is using the time warp ability and devotion at the right times in general, as that will save you from a ton of damage. The approach I've been using most recently is to use time warp at the start of the phase after taking over the first echo and then using sunshine. I would then use either an Adren Pot or Limitless Sigil to get off a wild magic if that's possible, if I feel there's enough time, and then be sure to use Devotion before the time warp ends. I'll then use that time to DPS down the first Kerapac clone until it's dead, using my refreshed Devotion cooldown to extend it off of the dead one. So like right when it's about to die, use Devotion again, and that will make the Devotion extend because something died during its effect. And I will then jump into my second echo, which is usually pretty close to dead at this point. And I'll try to use the Devotion that I just used, as well as the remaining Sunshine, to DPS down the second Kerapac clone as much as possible. But then I'll probably need to use a Time Warp and Barricade to prevent damage, as the third echo of mine will now be dead, and the Kerapac clone that it was fighting will now be on you as well. And after the warp ends, but the barricade is still active, so barricade lasts for longer than 10 seconds, and it will be still active after the time warp you used before it will end, I will use that time to eat up to full HP and then either build to Cade again. Hopefully the second Kerapac clone will be dying around now. That's the ideal. And then you just move on to the final one, which I'll use defensives against, like Reflect, Resonance, and Debilitate, while waiting for my Time Warp Devotion combo to be available once again. And once it is available, I'll use that to DPS down the final clone, leaving only Kerapac himself to finish off. And at that time, I'll tend to use another Time Warp and Barricade alongside Resonance and other defensives to stay alive until another Time Warp Devotion combination is available, which I will use to finish him off during that. And it's really pretty dang slow the way I do it in that way, and sorry if it was a bit confusing going through it all, but hopefully I explained it properly. But I've found it to be pretty successful and generally consistent so far without having to use a whole ton of food. The old approach I used, which I'll also show, was to try keeping all my echoes alive while slowly chipping down the 3 Kerapac clones. And this required me to pretty much constantly spam eat food and eat through my entire mammoth to barely survive the kill. But I mean, it did work as well. One big tip I would have though is to always try to time warp when you are at high health and then wait until near the end of the time warp to use your defensive like Devotion or Barricade, since this will allow you to regain your health with the warp and will save your defensive cooldown, as well as getting the most time out of your defensive as possible. That can help out a lot. Other than that, try to always make sure you're volning or smoke clouding the echoes where possible to ensure you have the maximum DPS. And I'm sure optimal strategies will evolve around this phase in the coming days and weeks. So if there's any super good meta rotation that is found that makes it really easy, I'll be sure to put it in a pinned comment. But the purpose of this guide, as I said at the beginning, is meant to just help out people who might be struggling with their first few kills or just want to get a solo in to say they've managed to do it. But it certainly doesn't contain the optimal strategies out there. But yeah, that is pretty much it, you guys. As far as loot goes from this boss, you can get the new Ability Codex, Greater Concentrated Blast, the new Gloves, Kerapac's Wrist Wraps, and the Godbook, Scripture of Jas, as well as, of course, one of the 3 pieces of the Tier 95 Staff of Armadyl. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below if this guide helped you out at all, and if you have any additional tips, be sure to put them down there as well. Good luck at Kerapac. Thank you all for watching the video, and peace out.